So you let me know.
It takes me.
And we are live.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to be discussing police, protests, and policy on our conversation on race. My name is Mary Watts Sparks, and I'm the Deputy Director for Community Action Partnership. And tonight, we're actually bringing back 3 reoccurring panelists from a different perspective this time. They will be speaking on this issue, and I'm going to just introduce them briefly since you've already seen them on our conversations before. But we have Joy Ayodele, who is an 18-year-old activist and organizer and leader who was born and raised here in Sonoma County and has been a part of the Black Lives Matter movement here locally. We have Amber Lucas, who is a lifestyle content creator who's been on the front lines of protests, organizing, and leading in this movement. And we have Chief Ray Navarro of the Santa Rosa Police Department, who has served in Santa Rosa PD for 28 years, and today is actually his 1-year and 9-day anniversary as the police chief. So thank you very much. Welcome, all 3 of you. We really, really appreciate you being here tonight. You know, tonight's conversation is going to be a difficult conversation. It's a personal conversation for all of you, and it's something that we need to address with honesty and passion and respect, but it's going to be something that we know will be a hard conversation to have. So I want to thank you all in advance for opening yourselves up to this conversation and these topics, and really being available to the public to give your perspective and feedback from, you know, the different areas that you guys are serving our community. So thank you. So with that being said, we're actually going to get started right away. We're going to look at criminal justice statistics in our country first to kind of preface this question. So currently, there are 2.2 million people in our prisons and jail systems in the US, and that's a 500% increase over the last 40 years. And this is actually related to a change in law and policy and not necessarily a change in crime rates. So when you break that down into some racial statistics, you look at 1 in 3 Black men in the US will somehow get involved in the criminal justice system, 1 in 5 Latinx men, and 1 in 17 white men. So those statistics actually change over pretty much the same for women as well. So with that being said, I want us to kind of think of this question personally and not necessarily where you are in your position of leadership, whether it's at the police department or a movement and so forth, and really think about, as you know, as a Black woman or a Latinx man, have you ever felt nervous or uncomfortable or threatened by law enforcement? And then on the flip side, has there been a time in your life that you can explain where you have felt protected by law enforcement? So let's start with Amber.
That's a loaded question. I think first to, you know, address the statistics that you shared. That's pretty stark. I mean, that's very Black and white data. It's something that's hard to turn away from. It's hard to look at those stats and be able to not want to question the reality of these numbers. There's something wrong. I think that can be agreed on. There's something wrong when you see statistics like that. 1 in 3 compared to 1 in 17. So just to address that, have I ever felt threatened by law enforcement? Yes, I have. Have I ever felt protected by law enforcement? Yes, I have. But the situations were completely different. They were night and day situations. So in one situation, I was a child growing up on the Big Island of Hawaii, and my father is the only cardiovascular surgeon on the island. I'm not gonna get my hand slapped too hard. especially when he's the physician who takes care of all the police on the island. You know, they're the one he calls. Here in California, I can't say that. Yes, I have felt threatened by law enforcement.
Can you kind of get into that a little bit more about, you know, the privilege that you had on the island of Hawaii versus how you feel now? Would you say that's a fair distinction?
Yeah, it's a fair distinction. Growing up in Hawaii, like, you know, my friends and I would do stupid things like sneak onto the beach after it was closed. You know, security would, you know, make a chain of phone calls, figure out who I was. It's a small island, and call my dad. Like, that's my type of interaction with law enforcement. In California, when I came out here for college, I was here for less than 10 days. I started, you know, college life on a new campus. My friend said, hey, do you want to go down the hill and go to Safeway? We barely made it off the property, and we were pulled over for not wearing our seatbelts, but we were wearing our seatbelts, and the entire car was searched.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Now let's actually jump to Chief Navarro. You are muted, so if you can unmute yourself, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Yeah, so you know, for me, you know what Amber was saying. You look at the numbers, and those are sobering. It's a sobering reminder that we have to do better as a society. You know, I mean, it does point to, you know, we have a lot of issues that we have to improve in. Not only, you know, there's things that we have to do better as law enforcement agencies and public safety, but I think society as a whole, we got to look at better at, you know, how these laws come about, and how you know, and you know, which ones are current and relevant and which ones aren't, you know, and why certain laws are you know, are more enforced than others, or the way people are you know, when they go through the court system, or when they're dealing with health issues, or with education. And so there's a lot of areas that I think that impact people of color, and specifically our Black population, where, you know, in some of the lower income neighborhoods, especially, you don't have complete access to, you know, better education or better health. And you know, if there's more crime, you're going to see more officers out there, and there's a greater chance of having that negative impact and negative contact. And so we have to continue to do a better job there. And you know, one of the things that we're trying to do now is, you know, through these conversations, is to listen and see how we can address that. Not every contact with the police department is going to be positive. But, you know, my goal is to make it respectful. And so we have, you know, we do have a job that we have to do, but we have to do it with respect. And, you know, our goal and our mission is really to make our city a safe place to live, work, and play. And, you know, when people don't feel safe, that's an issue for me. And so we continue to work and strive to do better in that area. And again, we're not perfect. And, you know, personally for me, my first contact with the police officer was when I was driving, when I was 16 years old with a couple of other people, and I got pulled over for speeding, and we all got taken out of the car and sat on the curb. My car was searched. And so it was a negative contact at the beginning. But after we went through it, the officer actually took some time to talk to us about what he did and why he did it. And so, although it started out negative, and it ended up being a semi-positive contact, because he at least treated us with respect. And so, you know, even myself as a police officer and the chief of police, when I see a police officer behind me, the first thing I do is look down at my speedometer to make sure I'm going the speed limit. So there's always a natural reaction. It's important that we continue to do a better job to make sure our contacts with people are respectful and professional.
Thank you. I think, you brought up the other areas in our society that there's clear systematic racism. I mean, I think we could have hours and hours of conversation looking at the health systems, looking at education. I mean, we could really dive into each of those really detailed and pull out the why and really how to fix it. But I think that it's, unfortunately, it all goes together, right? To make Black people feel a system that's not just for them. So I appreciate you mentioning those and bringing those up. Joy, can I ask you to to take that question as well?
Yeah, of course. I definitely, as I do have, I guess, a little bit less to say on this part, I would like to say that I have definitely, I'm sure throughout my life, felt protected by officers, though I would like to clearly, make the distinction that any incident where I felt protected, I can also recognize that it was very general. So for example, if I entered a building and there were, police around the area as security or things like that, or if there were events that I've attended where police have been security, I feel like that overall can add a lot of, comfort as far as also believing, at least, that the community is more likely to act out in a violent way towards, whatever the meeting, the gathering be, if officers are there. So I think that generally having their presence can be very comforting. And I think that I've, definitely felt that in my life. However, I have very personally felt endangered or in a very uncomfortable situation with officers, throughout my life. Definitely more in the time since I've been driving or been with friends that are driving. And so I'll give an example. And actually I was not driving in this situation, but I was, I believe I was probably 16 at this, I was 16 at this point. So I was still in high school. I was at Bodega with my friends, and I believe we were probably out there past sunset. So I believe that Bodega has a curfew. We were just in our car. We were actually heading out from the beach, and an officer had pulled over a car next to us, like a car from the street. They pulled into the parking lot at the beach. The officer got out of the car, looked in their car, was talking with them. And super quickly, just turned, that car remained there, but she quickly turned around and approached our car. And then, kind of asked us to roll down the window, asked us what we were doing there, so on. We told her that we had just, gotten back to the car, we're heading out. She proceeded to kind of look through the whole car. Then she asked the driver, as well as the passenger, if they had been drinking or intoxicated in any way. Smoking, they were both no, nothing, whatever. She then proceeded to go to the back seat, which is where I was, and shine the light in the car. And she asked me if I was intoxicated, to which I said no, which I was not. And she said, "I don't believe you." And I was like, okay, that's very, I wasn't really sure how to respond, to not escalate the situation. So she asked me again, she said, "Tell me that you're not intoxicated." And I was like, "I'm not intoxicated. I've not had anything this night at all." She then asked me for my ID. I was only 16 at the time. I didn't have my license, actually. I wasn't the one driving. So I didn't have anything. I didn't have any ID. And I told her that. I was like, I have my school ID, if that would work. And she was like, "I don't believe you. I'm going to end up searching you if you don't give me some type of ID." So I just showed her my school ID. I was like, "I genuinely don't have anything." She then told me as well that if I didn't give her any weed or anything like alcohol, if I had it on me, that she would try to arrest me and that I would get charged. So that was definitely, I would say, the first time I would say the first time that I personally felt very threatened and singled out. And I will say that the rest of the people in the car were white. None of them got asked even twice. And I not only got asked multiple times, but also threatened with arrest. So I would say definitely, I have felt threatened, whether it be directly or I've been in situations where my friends have also been threatened. So yeah, that's definitely what I would say overall. Is there's been multiple accounts of that I have definitely felt personally threatened or had, instances where I've not felt very protected by the officers that were there.
Thanks for sharing, all three of you, for sharing a personal example of that. I think it kind of leads into my next question that I want to discuss. Locally here in Sonoma County, there is a ballot measure being proposed for the November election to strengthen the Ayodele ordinance, which is the Independent Office of Law Enforcement Review. And it's really about civilian police oversight or transparency. And, currently it's now being threatened, I think, for a lawsuit to shut it down and not have it be on the ballot. I know specifically this is about Sonoma County as a whole, but I think, really what the point of the ordinance is about transparency and giving, the public some sort of a police oversight or law enforcement oversight. So with that being said, I wanted each of you to kind of maybe talk a little bit about what you think civilian police oversight could look like in Santa Rosa. If you do think that that's something that is important to have, and why so, and thinking about the examples that you just talked about in your personal lives, how you as a civilian would like to see police oversight. And then for Chief Navarro, if you can discuss how Santa Rosa Police Department, or as you as chief, if this is something that you'd be willing to look at in the future. So let's start with Joy this time.
Yeah. One thing, that I personally think would be very helpful, and I think that should be taken note of, as if there would be a way, if there's a way for the community to, for example, report such instances, or if they feel that they were met, with racial bias, by an officer, in the instance of even just being pulled over. I think that's very important, that those concerns can be met rather than just internalized and, continue on with your day and take that as like fear or, hate towards you. I think that'd be really important to be able to say, to this police force that you are, generally feeling that way towards, to be able to communicate that and to at least see some response, whether it be like, okay, we're at least taking note of that, or, keeping an eye out for if these complaints kind of reoccur. Because I know, we've seen instances within our own county where, officers have had a couple of reports. I know that even in the situation with the Andy Lopez shooting, speaking on the sheriff in general, at that time he was the sheriff deputy, I believe had a couple of other instances prior to that involving the Latinx people in the community. And I think that taking note of that, or being able to kind of, add your input to that, if you've, personally been affected or felt that way about an officer and an interaction that you've had with an officer in the community, I think that would be really great. And I would really hope that if that was taken into account, that, when we would see those things kind of escalate, or, we were seeing a really negative pattern, that it wouldn't be tolerated.
Thank you. I'll give it over to Amber now.
Yeah, I think having something similar like the Ayodele for city would be incredibly beneficial for our community. I think it would be a powerful way to respond to these protests that we've had. I think it would be a very positive way to respond, because it would give us the sense that we are being listened to and that we're being heard. Because the job and the duty of the police department, of the sheriff department here for us, is to protect the community. And to effectively do that, I think that there should be a third party that holds them accountable, an independent third party that can research these incidences without bias and track these types of behaviors and really research into them to make sure that what's being done is fair and just and without bias. I think it would be absolutely beneficial for our community.
And Chief Navarro, if you can talk a little bit about Ayodele. There was a question specifically on Facebook that is the chief willing to endorse the measure? I'm not sure if that you are able to answer that, but that was a Facebook question.
Yeah, so I'm gonna avoid the political piece of the topic. What I can tell you is that I am completely supportive of having assistance in oversight. And so what we've done in the past is we've had a police auditor. We haven't had one for about 18 months now. That's something that we're trying to get back on board right now. And so we're working on that. The way that I envision the police auditor as working within the city is that that auditor does have the ability to take complaints So it provides an avenue for the public. If they don't want to come to the police department, they can go and they can talk, they can make the complaint with the auditor, who will ultimately end up forwarding that information to us. But it provides a nexus there and allows people to go to talk to somebody else, a third party. It's important that we have, I think the auditor is important when we're looking at how are we doing, right? Are we getting back to the people who are complaining? Are we thorough in our investigations? Are we fair? Are we fair to the community, and are we fair to our employees? And what does that discipline look like if it comes to discipline? And so I think that position helps us be accountable to the community. And so I think that's going to be an important measure as we move forward. And so I think all of those are important. And if the auditor would reports directly to the city manager, they don't report to me. And so it is independent of the police department. We provide full access to our investigations, or that's my goal. And that way, if an auditor feels that there's something that they need to look at, I'm fully supportive of having somebody come in and having that independent auditor have those discussions, because we want to continue to be better. And I think we do a good job, but I think that an auditor is something that we've had in the past, and I think it's something that's going to be valuable in the future.
So we had a question come in from Facebook around this. How can we, would the police department support the auditor being, instead of a consultant, but being, a hired employee of the cities? And I know you mentioned they report to the city manager. How can we ensure more transparency with that position?
So those are it's a very good question. With some of the things that we're going to ask, or I think that's important for an auditor position, is to provide regular reports, right? So that those reports are going to be would be public. Now I don't know, you're not going to have names attached to those, but it'll let the public know, the community know, what types of complaints we're getting. Are they internal? Are they external? How are we doing with getting back to people? And are we rendering fair discipline? And is it working, right? Because the ultimate goal is to, for me, is to stop the behavior, right? So if there's negative behavior that's occurring, I want to be able to stop that and correct it early on, right? And so we're all human. We all make mistakes. We're held to a higher standard because we have, we're giving a lot of authority. And so we shouldn't abuse that. And so it's important that we have these balancing mechanisms, and that they're able to be reported out to the city manager, and those reports would be available for public consumption. I don't know exactly what that report would look like per se, but I know that there's different ways to set it up, and each one costs a little bit different. So if you're talking about an independent consultant or an auditor outside, or somebody who works for the city, there's different, it's going to cost different, it's going to cost, different amounts of budgets and stuff like that. But I am supportive of having an auditor. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to a very specific example in Santa Rosa that I would like first Joy and Amber to speak on. We have a statue in front of our mall that has been there, I think, since 1994, maybe, and it is a white hand. So for those of you local who are not, or for those of you not local, not from Santa Rosa, it's pretty much in a very public space, this white hand. And recently it was painted by, I believe, activists, painted over black. And this hand is owned by Simon, which is the owner of the mall. But I was wondering if you guys could speak to kind of what does that hand mean to this movement, and the different occurrences that have happened since then with washing off the black paint and so forth. So Amber, if you can kind of, discuss, I know that this was I saw pictures on your social media feed of this hand, and kind of what does it symbolize and what does the narrative around it mean to you?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I want to say art, especially public art, will always be political. That hand has been at the center of other political movements in the past. So for this movement, I feel like it's no different. It's a white hand, and it is meant to symbolize Luther Burbank scattering seeds amongst the community, amongst this county, right? And it's a nod to agriculture. As a Black female, as a person of color, I don't see a whole lot of white hands in the fields in our agriculture. I see brown and Black hands. And I would like to know from the artist's point of view what his thought process behind that was. Because quite frankly, it's a slap in the face to have a white hand and to contribute to Luther Burbank for this community, when really it's the brown and Black hands in the fields that have made this county and its agricultural systems what they are today. That's
No, I think that's, you know, I don't know if everyone on this that is watching knows the history of that, but I think that you summarized what that meant really well, especially from your perspective. But Joy, do you have anything to add around that?
I definitely agree. One, of course, I'm aware a lot of people don't actually know the history of that sculpture, considering that there's so many, photos in front of it, and kind of it's a stopping photo op. It is definitely a center like art piece within Santa Rosa, and if you've lived here, you definitely have encountered it. But it's titled Agraria, and it is exactly that. It is supposed to be a tribute to the culture and the agriculture within our county, and like what really helped get it to where it is, to make this land so beautiful, and to just blatantly, I feel like, ignore and kind of turn away from the Black and brown communities that, exactly as Amber said, are very primarily not only within this local area, but like within our nation, but as well historically seen having really taken a huge part in working on this land. I feel like that was definitely a huge slap in the face. And I think, it was definitely, to see it painted Black was kind of a moment of like, you are acknowledging what has so, blatantly been left out of the history of this county. And I think that, seeing that was really inspiring and powerful for me, seeing how quickly, everybody was kind of, exactly sharing that and adding their own piece to that and what that really meant. And even one comment that I saw, actually, I believe like the day that was happening, or later that day, somebody said the white hand meant nothing, but the Black hand speaks volumes. And I feel like that's very much so true, because nobody knew what it meant. Nobody took anything from it. And I think that regardless of where you stood, whether people were feeling, that it was vandalism, or whether people felt that it was just art, passionate art, I think that, they were paying attention to it and were part of that conversation. And I think that's not something that hand was ever doing before. And I think that seeing it washed away, only though it was honestly very disheartening to see that washed away, I think that only solidified that the Blackness and brown community within this community has just been erased historically, and they just did it again, or they're trying to. And I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that this movement is very much so permanent, not so much a moment at all, but it's clear that they're trying. And to see that, or to feel that our city is actively, kind of going against that, or not taking the opportunity to uplift, is very, very disheartening. Especially even, I've seen in Sebastopol, they have their own Black Lives Matter, like Black Fist statue right when you drive into the city. And I know that, everybody's kind of doing like different, homage tributes as far as like the Black Lives Matter paintings within the streets, so on. And we're not really seeing anything like that within Santa Rosa. And, we have our sheriff in Santa Rosa, the county sheriff, and we have our police department. And there have been a lot of opportunity to uplift, and that would have been a moment to simply, I would say, do nothing. And that could have been a moment that would speak in itself volumes. And that wasn't done. So that's just my personal piece on that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we can't go back and make them unwash it and put it back how it was. So I don't know if Chief Navarro, if you have anything to add, or maybe even as as the city. I know it's not owned by the city, but is there anything that we can kind of do to make it a better piece of art, or or how as a community can we kind of work together? And it doesn't have to just be the chief, but if any of you have anything that we can add, but I'll first let the chief answer.
Yeah, so I definitely think what both Joy and Amber have stated rings true. I mean, there definitely is there's a loud voice right now, and trying to affect change, and change is needed throughout our nation. I think that the hand is it is a piece of property owned by a company, and so it technically it was a vandalism. What I would hope is that we can, if there was something that needed to be changed, and I see where that the large white hand, I see what kind of statement that is, or can be, but if there's people want to affect change, I think one starting point would be contact Simon Malls and find out, hey, can we, is there something that we can do differently? Is there a change in how we, in changing the color of the hand, or maybe adding another piece if that hand was specifically for Luther Burbank? But I think the conversation is there, and I think it's ripe to have those conversations to be able to make some of these changes in a legal fashion, in a peaceful fashion. And that's what I hope. I hope that we can have those conversations and make those changes, but do it in a way that's that's legal and that's peaceful. And I don't know I have no idea what their response would be at Simon Properties. You'd have to talk to them, but I think it's right for conversation.
Amber, I'm going to go to you because you have face on. So if you could, what do you want to happen with the hand? I mean,
well, one thing that I really kind of, yes, okay, let's acknowledge the hand, right? And what it symbolizes, and the fact that art will always be political, especially public art. But two, one thing that I want to reiterate is that that was a performance. The hand going from white to black, that was a performance. That was a statement. When we look at Sebastopol, that's willing to put Black Lives Matter on the square, put the fist, right? That was through the city. That was not through a privately owned company. And art can promote thought. It can promote statements. And so the hand on private property, we want to call it vandalism by technicalities. Okay, sure. But at the end of the day, like, the art that we're seeing in Sebastopol, that was done in conjunction with the city. That was done in conjunction with the powers that could affect change in a positive way with their communities. So I don't really want to focus on the white hand turning black and then being like cleaned off to white again. Like, if we want to talk about procuring effective change, then maybe we can work with Chief Navarro in putting some public artwork display up in solidarity with Black Lives Matter.
Thanks. That's a great point. I think that there's probably some other city officials and elected officials hopefully watching this, or will watch this, and that would be a good actual item that we can come out of this. That sounds like an exciting thing that we could maybe try to work on. I'm going to shift it to a little bit more personal, I think, for some of you. I want to get to some of the protests that have been organized. Joy and Amber, you have been organizing protests for the last few months here in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County as a whole. And I kind of want to, talk a little bit about what you have faced. You've discussed that you have faced violence in these protests. From civilian violence, from violent or unproductive narrative around protests. And I kind of want you guys to get a little bit about what some of the protests that you've organized, you can give examples, and how you feel that the narrative around these protests have not been productive for the work that you're trying to accomplish. I know that's a big question and it's kind of open, but Amber, if you want to start with some of the ones you've done, and then we'll go to Joy, and then we'll open it up to the chief.
Yeah, so the most recent protest that I co-hosted with another organizer was held at Doyle Park, and that was Community Unity Beat the Heat. It turned out great. It was awesome. A lot of the community showed up to support it, and I'm thankful for that. There have been several other, honestly, a lot of these blur together because we've been very active, which, is heartening and disheartening at the same time, because like you said, it's been months and we're still out here. We are still doing this, and our purpose has not changed, and it's hard. It's hard. It's hard emotionally. It's hard physically. It taxes you because you're made to question. Well, you're not made to question yourself, but you're really made to question in the society in which you live. And it's really challenging when you feel like it's being spun against you, the whole narrative. We can talk about individual incidences. The strongest one for me is the one on June 20th on Sonoma Avenue at 9:20 in the evening, dealing with the Porsche, being literally on the front lines of that. There was no one between me and that car on the front lines. There was no one else in front of me. The only thing in front of me was that vehicle. And the way that the narrative was spun from that, I sat down and cried. Like, I read that press release, that overly biased press release, and cried, because I knew that that press release was going to give every future vehicle that was inconvenienced temporarily by a protest, it was going to give them the right and the freedom and the boldness to plow right through crowds, as we've continued to see happen over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where it happens with almost every single protest, every single one. And I would like to remind anyone watching this live stream right now that it says on our driver's license that driving is a privilege and not a right. It is a privilege, not a right. Please remember that.
Thanks, Amber. And I know this is really hard for you to talk about, so thank you. Joy, do you have, do you want to talk about the narrative around some of your protests that you've worked on?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think that this is a great opportunity, to directly, one, obviously communicate with everybody listening, but as well as with the chief, because I know that, in between all the shouting, it can be hard to convey the direct point, but I think it's very important to not let these things get brushed under the rug, because as Amber has said, it is continuing to happen again and again and again. And I personally have not felt any shift in that situation. From my very first event that I organized, not the first event that I attended, but the first event that I organized, that was June 1st. That was probably the largest event that I organized. It was primarily youth, and most of them were ranging from like ages younger than myself even. There's a lot of middle schoolers there, actually a lot of high schoolers. So like between like 12 and I would say like 21 was like what the majority of the group was. And we had hundreds of people in the street that day. We were very, very quickly met with aggression. We marched down Mendocino near the Safeway. That was the first time that we kneeled. We ended up kneeling throughout that whole march, I believe like 5 or 6 times at different intersections for 9 minutes each time. However, at that very first intersection that we kneeled at, a Prius drove through us, like just blatantly drove through us. And that was the first time that I'd seen someone like actually hit like by the car. There were young girls that were kneeling, because we were all kneeling in the intersection, and this woman just drove through and knocked them to the ground. Now, in each of these instances, I will say, like, as the main person organizing, I've tried to communicate with the person, if possible, that is kind of escalating situation. And even to see in that situation that the woman in the car felt that she was the victim for having traffic blocked. And it wasn't because she was in any emergency, it was because she was inconvenienced. And she was a very much so grown woman, and she, hurt children younger than myself, and felt that she was in the right, and in fact that we were in the wrong. That was the very first incident, and that was honestly the lightest incident that I feel like I've experienced, and definitely the lightest incident of that day. We proceeded to keep marching. At one intersection, a man in a huge Dodge truck was revving his engine as I believe like 5 young girls kneeled in front of his car. Again, not doing anything. He revved it to the point where smoke is going in their face, and then stops the car and puts on a clown mask and proceeds to keep doing it and just revving. And I was like, this is the moment when, I don't know what to do. So I told the protesters that were behind the car to like back away, ended up trying to communicate with the man, and he did thankfully back out of the situation instead of driving through the girls that were less than a foot away from his car. But the fact that he felt even so comfortable to be revving it, any slip up, the brakes gone, you just severely hurt these young people. We kept marching, get to another intersection. This one was the intersection of College and Brookwood, and this was the last time that we kneeled that day. We got to the intersection, and actually, I wouldn't even say that we fully kneeled. We knelt for about 1 minute, and then a blue Mini Cooper drove straight through us. Again, multiple youth hit in that situation. Youth that, that, I'm not even gonna talk about that. Later we're also like, protesters that were charged with peaceful protesting, youth that kind of got caught up in that situation. And to see that firsthand, like they were the ones met with violence, that was very disheartening. But thankfully, like there was not too much damage. I believe that, some people, like we ended up clearing up the other side of the intersection. She was able to leave. And that one was overall not too damaging. However, we very quickly regrouped, and a white pickup truck approached the event coming from College, like one of the other sides of College. Important to note, this person had not even been stuck in traffic. They had not been backed up by this protest. They did approach our event. The man then parks the car, maybe, a couple of yards away from the protesters that had started kneeling again, gets out of his driver's side door and pulls a shotgun on the crowd. And I was at the very front of the crowd with, again, like a lot of young people that time. I had kind of tried to stay with the younger group after the instances like occurred, especially like earlier on. We were all in the front, and all of a sudden, like everybody just like starts getting up and running. However, this was a really large group, so there was still like 100, hundreds of people plus that were not aware of what was going on, and so they see like a wave of like 10 girls like running away, like screaming. And so I had to, turn around instantly, like, he has a gun, you need to leave, disperse the event, everybody, whatever, We all end up running down different streets. The man got back in his car, ended up chasing bikers and like skateboarders down a bit different street, was also threatening them. I ended up thankfully getting to a side street, and I found some of the younger people that had been protesting. This young girl, who I found out later was 14, and a very, very lovely young woman. She was having an anxiety attack and as well as an asthma attack, and had no inhaler, nothing there on her. We were in a random street downtown. Thankfully, I was able to get in contact with someone that did have an inhaler because, my main team, like we had all been dispersed, we weren't together, so I just had found someone and was able to help that situation. We got her inhaler. Almost within the moment that she got her breath back, we had the second group of kids running down the street screaming that he was coming back and chasing us again. To the point where we then all kind of ran and hid in people's parking garages, underneath cars, in people's like porches, different things, like anywhere, and I personally called the police that day, right then. I called the police before he'd even turned down the second street. As I was trying to help the young girl, I called the police, I called them again, and I know that other people around me were calling the police. I never saw the police in that incident. I ended up regrouping about 20 minutes later on that like college, I guess, with a huge majority of the group. We did not see any police. And I know that police did show up later on. I know that the incident was dealt with. However, we never saw them and they were never there. And that is important to note. Again, we were at College in Brookwood, which is down the street from the police station. Now, they did not show up, yet in the printed article by the Press Democrat, the police it does say that the police kind of, offered some information to the Press Democrat. The first printed article that was actually in the newspaper said that the man never had a gun at all, actually, and that he'd only pulled like roof racks, for your truck out of his car, the bed of his truck. Then later it was updated. I sent in multiple complaints to Press Democrat. I mean, I'm sure a lot of other protesters did. Within the next couple of days, it was later updated to say that he did have a shotgun, but it was non-functioning, and he only retrieved it after protesters beat him with a skateboard. And again, important to note that he had not been waiting there. He hadn't been blocked in traffic. He approached us, drove up to us, and exited his vehicle.
Yeah,
There was no time to beat him had we wanted to. And I think that's only that was the very first situation I experienced. As Amber said, it's been months, and I'm very, very tired. And it's not gotten any better. We've had people drive through us, hit the cars that were there to protect us, hit people that were there, with us marching peacefully. We've had people pull weapons on us, knives, guns, so on. And I have not once seen the police narrative be in favor with the protesters and or at least reaching out to get their perspective. It has very much so been one-sided, and it is truly very damaging. When you even go on these posts or these articles and you see so many people, they're like, oh, well, our police force is handling it and they're, clearly stating that we are in the wrong. That gives the community a certain image, of the peaceful protesters, and it is extremely damaging. And it is only clearly allowing these people to feel comfortable to continue doing it.
I know it's hard for you to even have to discuss only one of those incidents. I'm sure that there are a lot more you can, talk about, but I want to, give Chief Navarro a couple minutes to, talk about how can the police department, communicate with these protests and really, think about the safety of the protesters as well, and what steps can we really do to try to stop the civilian violence that's been met with at the protests.
Yeah, and I think I've said this in the past, but we have Sonoma County has a history of doing a lot of protests. We have a lot of demonstrators, and throughout the past several years, and we've what we have done in the past is we've worked with groups who are when they want to march on the street. And so I think one of the things that we can do, it's important to know when these are happening, because I think sometimes, and not to take anything away from the experiences that Amber or Joy have mentioned, but when there's a large group of people walking down the street, and it's people don't know if things are shut down or a big group's coming, that's when there's a greater chance of agitation. And so what we've done in the past is we've worked with demonstrators who have done marches, and they've told us where they're going. If it's permitted through the city, then we will evaluate to see if there's a need for police departments the police department to be a part of it, either at the front or the back, or at the very least we can have discussions. We have a sergeant that oversees our traffic bureau, and at the very least we can have the organizers contact my sergeant and have the discussion about, well, how do we make this as safe as possible, and if it's making sure that the demonstrators have the appropriate amount of monitors and maybe highly visible or what have you, we can start having those discussions to try to make it as safe as possible. Our biggest goal is we want to be able to have a safe community. We want people to be able to peacefully demonstrate. And when you have groups clash, whether it's you have demonstrators walking down the street and you have vehicles coming in, it does present a very dangerous situation when cars get caught in the middle of a large group, and it's we want to make it as safe as possible. So I think moving forward, I think one of the things we can do is try to work together and work more collaboratively to make sure that the groups are safer when they're doing that.
I want to, spend a few minutes and open it up between, the three of you to have a conversation. If you want to, stick with some of the questions around this topic, about the protests or anything like that. But I want to open it up for you guys to talk to each other without me having to ask you specific questions for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to start with Amber. If there's any questions that you want to bring up and talk about that can be discussed, that would be great if you could start.
Yeah. So, Ray, I would like to ask you directly, how often are you made aware of the protests before they happen?
I'm aware when they happen. Sometimes we hear about it a few days in advance. Sometimes it's the day of. But when there's a protest, I'm ultimately notified of it happening. So, but it depends. Sometimes we have gotten calls saying, "Hey, we're going to be out here," and then other times it happens. So, but they will let me know personally when there is a protest going on.
So they do let you know.
Yeah. So there was a completely different type of protest yesterday somewhere else. Had nothing to do with this, but I found out after it already started, but I was made aware of it. So my team lets me know when these things are coming up, if they know it, or if it's in the process. It's something that I've asked my staff to make sure that they keep me apprised of what's happening.
And if you are made aware of these protests ahead of time, and you want your community to be safe during these protests, is there a reason why there isn't some sort of on-site or police somewhat in the premises around the area to make sure that these crowds aren't being driven through?
That's a good question. And actually, that was going to be a question that I had for both of you. And it's really, we're trying to have a balance of not being around and allowing you to have a voice, right? And then because, we've had situations. We had a situation where we had a police car driving to an emergency call going through the street, and the car actually got surrounded. And I don't know if it was one of your demonstrations or not, but it made it difficult for that car to get by. And so, I think it's important to have that balance, right? How do we stay, we don't want to be visible because we want to allow you to feel free and peacefully demonstrate. Once the police there can be more agitation. But then there's the other hand where it's important that we're there to provide some level of public safety. And I think that's where the conversation that we need to have moving forward. How do we balance that out? And so I don't know if I have the exact answer for you, Amber, but I think it's definitely something that we need to move forward and work together on to make it as safe as possible. And because there's always going to be some level of presence, whether it's we're going to respond afterwards because we get a call from a demonstrator who says a car goes through and almost hit them or did hit them, or we're going to get a car of, the driver calls and says, somebody just smashed my window with a skateboard. Right. And so when we're trying to stay away to allow the demonstration to take place, we are aware, but we're trying not to get too close because we want you to allow to be able to peacefully demonstrate. And that's what we've been doing over the last, at least month. And it does make it difficult. So I would love to find out how do we work together to better communicate that and see what you guys want. So I guess my question is, what do you want to see from the police department?
Yeah,
do you not want to see us?
I want to acknowledge the Back the Blue event that happened in July. That was a stark contrast to see on the square, a police officer parked with his vehicle physically on the square, and then have a cop car on the two other sides of where there was parking. To have a total of what I saw, 6 cop cars for roughly less than maybe 30 protesters, back the blue rally folks there to see roughly 4 to 6 cop cars for that event. Whereas, there have been emails sent back and forth with the police where, they're made aware of it ahead of time. There's no presence. I completely understand wanting to have to kind of hold back, to not be as visible at protests. I understand that. I would agree that, tensions can get pretty high with the high visibility of uniformed officers. It gets even worse when they're in riot gear. So yeah, I think that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, that particular demonstration, we actually got, we didn't show up until we got a call for service. So I don't know what the call for service was, but we got a call and we were dispatched to Courthouse Square. So, and I was eating at La Rosa, and I saw a supervisor and one officer there. So I may not have been there when the multiple officers were there, but it was a call for service. So we did not go there on our own. So just to let you know. So but let's talk. Let's talk.
Joy, are there any questions that you have?
I would definitely like to kind of stay on that topic a little bit. So yes, I'm actually aware that the police have stated they responded to a call for the Back the Blue event, the Bridge the Blue event that was held downtown. However, it stated, at least in the press release, that they responded to reports of a violent verbal altercation, which of course, I understand. Regardless, they were responding to a call. However, they responded to the call and then remained in the square. It was not only a response, but a statement to be there. However, we have not seen our police force respond, at least not immediately, to these actual violent incidents we've had where people have driven through us or threatened us more than just verbally. We haven't seen the police, at least I have not, personally seen the police force respond immediately, nor, continue to stay with us, especially once they're aware that event has escalated in such a violent way. And that not only, I think, speaks volumes as far as clear lack of support for these protesters, or, a clear lack of protection for these protests themselves. But it's also important to note that it's far deeper than that, as far as just the message that you are sending, because though, yes, the event was 30 or 40 people, and overall, not necessarily the loudest event, necessarily didn't get the most coverage. It needs to be noted that at these Back the Blue events, Bridge the Blue events, not only in Santa Rosa, but just in our county, Petaluma, so on, they're notorious for not just being in support of police officers, but as well supporting Trump, as well supporting All Lives Matter. Yet we haven't seen our police force come and stand with Black Lives Matter, nor make a huge, a statement or a huge stand. And briefly showing up to events or making statements that you understand or you support is not, it's frankly not enough. And I know that I blatantly don't feel that support, from our police force. And considering that we are, our current political leader of our nation has actively refused pretty much to stand in support with Black Lives Matter, that a member of his own council has gone as far as to call the Black Lives Matter movement a domestic terrorist group. That is more than politics. That is an issue of human rights, and it's extremely damaging and extremely dangerous to the Black communities. And it would be really great to see our police force make a stand and acknowledge that we have a lot going against us. And considering that you have sworn to protect, it would be great if you could be aware and acknowledge that some groups are in need of more protection than they've been receiving.
Yeah. So oh, I'm sorry. There's a little echo going on. So I can't, Joy, we have responded. I don't know how fast we've been able to get there, but I can tell you that we have had officers who've contacted people. With the large amount of group, you may not have seen them. I don't know, but we have had officers respond to anytime somebody says I got assaulted, we're going to respond to it. Right. That's my expectation. And my understanding is that we've responded to each and every one of those. Again, I think I want to make sure that we provide as much of a safe environment as we can. And I think that's, I think it's important for us all to have those discussions, or at least my staff to have those discussions with you, and to address future demonstrations. And again, we've done this for years in the past. We've seen people march from Sebastopol Road to downtown up to the sheriff's department, and we've done it even without us there, and it's been successful and nonviolent. And so there's a way to do it, and I think we just got to figure out what that looks like, and it may be just having that prior conversation to see where it goes, because I don't want the demonstrators to be a victim in anything, and I don't want the people in the vehicles to be a victim in anything. I want, my goal is to, our goal is to try to, allow everybody to be safe to demonstrate and then safely travel the roads as they need.
I'm gonna, we have a lot of questions coming in, and there's one that I specifically want to get to before we close. And this is, specifically for Chief Navarro, but, a lot of people are asking what is something specific and tangible that we can do to make things better moving forward? And is there a, a step that the police department is making to really support the Black Lives Matter movement and, and these protests, and really something specific?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So over the last couple months, we've been having, or last month, we've been having community conversations, and so something like this is vital, right? So for me, I want to listen and hear what's going on, and it's, again, I think the biggest thing is safety, and so probably one of the biggest things that I think we can commit to from the police department side, from a safety standpoint, is I want to be able to have those conversations before the demonstrations happen, so we can have an idea where things are going, how do we make things safe, and whether we're there or whether we're helping provide some information on how to maintain safety as much as possible. We will, that's something that we can do. Sometimes it takes, because we have officers that are responding to emergency calls throughout the day. If we have to be there, we have to up staff and we have to add more officers, which, so we still have the calls for service for 911 calls. So I think those are some conversations we can have. And I'll commit to having those conversations. And we're going to continue doing our community engagement program that we're doing through the city to speak with the different groups, both online and in person, and to have those conversations. And then we're from a police department standpoint, we're reviewing our policies, we're engaging with the public, and then we're going to provide information on what we learned after we're done with these community conversations. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And again, I want to be able to, I think the biggest move we can do right now is to have some conversations about how do we make these demonstrations safe moving forward.
A lot of comments in the Facebook, but I think a lot of them kind of come down to around, the larger real concept around social movements and protests, and how protests are not supposed to be convenient if they want to incite real social change, and how it is a right to have a protest and without having a permit and so forth. But how do you think the city of Santa Rosa would be willing and able to have a future Black Lives Matter protest in conjunction with city staff and the Santa Rosa Police Department?
That's a conversation that we need to have with more than just me. But again, I think what the biggest issue right there is we want to make sure that everybody's safe. And so I totally get you don't need a permit to have a protest. But to have the conversation about what's going on to make it as safe as possible, I think is important, right? So that's the biggest thing. And I know things happen, things are dynamic, and when things become unsafe, it's because the dynamics get a little out of control. So so we want to try to curb that, make sure it's peaceful. So again, I'm willing to have conversations, continue to have the conversations, and be happy to talk to our the other city leaders about how we can make these demonstrations safer.
So I'm going to close with a question for each of you, and this is a hard question, but in just one sentence, what is a change you can see that could actually happen realistically within the month of August, let's say? So a quick change in one sentence that you would like to see happen. So let's, Joy, if you want to start us off.
In the next month, I would like to see, at the very least, our police department make a stand, whether that be for their discussion, whether that be an actual event, a stand and a statement with the Black Lives Matter movement and with the brown and Black community. It is time for blue to black, not back in the blue.
Thank you. And how about Chief Navarro? Is there something in the month of August you could see as a realistic change in one sentence?
I think we can see a realistic, significant safety change by having a conversation about the demonstrations a couple of days before it happens, so we can make everybody safe. I'm committed to that.
Thank you. And Amber, how about you?
I would like to see more actionable talk for a CAHOOTS type program. I would love to see that. I think that would be great. I think that would be a great step in the right direction for us as a community. For those who are listening, CAHOOTS is a crisis response program that relieves a lot of stress and phone calls from the local police department and can allow officers to focus on other more pressing things.
Thank you. Yes, that's definitely something that we could hope could get agendized at the city council meetings. I know that they've already had those conversations, but all three of those I think are realistic, and I'm really excited to hear that there's a commitment to have further conversations, whether it's a direct connection with the police department to be able to notify 2 days in advance when these demonstrations are happening, to have that safety conversation, or to try to get something agendized at city council, or really even just a narrative statement around our city as a whole supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. I think those are all realistic. So I want to thank all three of you for joining us tonight. I know we didn't get to answer everyone's questions on social media, but I think all three of these people are willing to answer any questions that you have offline. So please reach out to them, whether it's through email or social media, and we'll try to get their contact information out so that you can engage with them on an individual level. So thank you all for tuning in tonight. Next week, we are going to have another conversation on our Community Conversations on Race, same time. And it's going to be about, is this movement really going anywhere, and how to not let the Black Lives Matter movement become old news. So please tune in next week, and thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.